Welcome to this session called Writing India Today. With me are two new authors in the sense the earliest that between them they published was in 2005. So we can very well say they are part of this post-millennia writers. So between 2005 and the latest that book which came out between the two of them was in 2018. So they're very, very topical. So on my far right I have Chandrahas Choudhury and Sudeep Chakravarti. So I'll begin with Chandrahas. He's a novelist, columnist, essayist. He's born in Hyderabad. He grew up in Bombay, as not opposed to Mumbai. You can tell us why that is. And his native Orissa. He was educated at the universities of Delhi and Cambridge. He studied English. He now lives between Delhi, Mumbai and Bhubaneswar. He's the author of the novels Arzee, the Dwarf, published in 2009, shortlisted for the Commonwealth First Book Prize, and designated as one of the 60 essential English language works of modern Indian literature by World Literature Today, and Clouds, which came out last year, 2018. His forthcoming book of short stories is called Days of My China Dragon, which is set in a Chinese restaurant in Mumbai. His book reviews appear in the National, the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. He's also the editor of the anthology of Indian short fiction called India, a Traveler's Literary Companion, which came out in 2010. Chandrahas likes to nap, cook, throw parties, to which we are not invited, of course, play football and wander through cities and continent. Sudeep Chakravarti is an essayist, author, columnist, activist and journalist. He was educated at the University of Delhi, St. Stephen's History, and his latest non-fiction book is the critically acclaimed and best-selling The Bengalis, a portrait of a community which was a finalist at the Hindu Literature Awards 2018 and Tata Literature Awards 2018. He is the author of several other works of narrative non-fiction, Red Sun, Travels in Naxalite Country, 2008, which was a finalist at the Crossword Awards in 2009, which was on India's Maoist rebellion. Highway 39 Journeys Through a Fractured Land, 2012, set in Northeast India, which he incidentally calls Far East India. He'll also explain why. Which basically was a journey that he took from Numligarh to More, which is now the center point for travel to all the way to Bangkok, part of the Asian highway system. Incidentally, Highway 39 has been renumbered, so don't go looking for Highway 39 on Google Maps. It doesn't exist anymore. He's also written a book which I could not get hold of, could not read, called Clear Hold Pinned, which is published in 2014, winner of the Award for Excellence at the Asian Publishing Awards, which was on business and human rights and corporate social responsibility in India, and which also received the Award for Excellence at the Asian Publishing Awards. So his novels are Tin Fish, which came out in 2005, and a kind of a sequel called The Avenue of Kings in 2010, dealing with the same Borun Roy called Brandy, and The Baptism of Tony Kalangute, which was published in 2008 under the title called Once Upon a Time in Oporanto by Penguin in 2008. Sudeep withdrew that and then republished it in 2018 called The Baptism of Tony Kalangute. And many short stories. His work is translated into several Indian and European languages. Sudeep's next book is on the Battle of Polashi, which is part of the Look East and Act East colonial policies and politics. Sudeep is among India's leading independent columnists and commentators on matters of conflict and conflict resolution. Sudeep has over 3 decades of experience in media. He has also lectured at various educational and global fora. He is a trained scuba diver and an intrepid traveler. So, because it's called Writing India Today, and because very interesting, the two of you put together have been perambulating all over India. So, you're born in Hyderabad, but you're basically from Orissa. You did your education from Delhi, then you went to Cambridge. And then you also went back to work in Mumbai. And your novels are set in Mumbai. Okay, you are a Bengali, but you studied in Mayo College, Ajmer. And then you studied at St. Stephen's History. You worked in Delhi. And somewhere in 2004 you shifted to Goa. And then in 2012 you're writing from a place called Veliangiri Hills. So between the two of you, what is it possible to write India?
I suppose it is possible, but it is possible to write an India of your own invention, and you actually make up a story all through your life, and which is why when you bring up the idea of these journeys, I actually think maybe Sudeep and I are not so unusual. all of us in this room have roots in 3 or 4 places, have lived in 2 or 3 other cities, perhaps have lived abroad. I think they are the journeys that are made up for you by people above you or by the circumstances of your life. And then at some point there's journeys that you decide to make for yourself. And that then is a special interest and a special charge, but some of it is lit up. In my case, it is lit up. I think the facts of having had a childhood in Bombay, which gives me perhaps another 10 years of the kind of memory that you don't construct, as soon as you become an adult. You start thinking, this could be useful, that's something I know, these are the people I want to hang out with. But I think there's something, this is one of the great themes of literature, by the way, the power of unconscious memory and childhood memories to influence everything you do for the rest of your life. And I'm sure it's the same with Sudeep. We grew up in a time when, if you wanted to travel, you took the train, and aviation was not something that... Yes, I am. Actually, this links me to the idea of writing India, because when you think of a country, first of all, as Indian writers, we're extremely lucky to have me doubly so, because one, in the world of novels, the mysteries never end, and two, if you have such a big landscape and a subcontinent in front of you, of which you have roots in 2 or 3 parts, and then interest in some others, and a developing idea of some others, then that journey is never going to end either. And that, I think, especially in the world of novels, I think writing India means linking together stories which otherwise don't appear in the same frame. And especially in the writing of Clouds, this is what I wanted to do, to bring together the world of the Parsis of Bombay and the tribals of Orissa. I'm sure no one had done it before, but it wasn't just my aim to put them together for the sake of doing so, but to find some sort of relationship between those 2 worlds that only a novel could bring out. And that, I think, is the pleasure of being an Indian novelist, to have such a rich store of material to sort of, not only to observe, but then to embroider and invent upon.
Chandrahas spoke about being, in effect, what publishers or agents call the crossover story, in a way. Usually it's applied to India or the subcontinent or the brown places on earth, which cross over to the whiter places on earth. Essentially, that's a crossover story. But in his case, it is basically, very importantly so, to go from one part of India, if you will, or one mind or universe in India, to cross over and link another mind and maybe bring it all together, cumulatively to a 3rd place, or a 4th, or a 5th, or an infinity of places. I've written 3 novels, but my non-fiction work is, I imagine, what drives me primarily. For me, because I also write non-fiction, and it's something that I've derived from my years as a journalist, which I no longer am in tenure, but I am in my heart and soul. I continue to be. So much so that it infects my fiction writing, because I sometimes tend to possibly over-research sometimes, and tend to over-explain. I mean, that's a sin that I'm trying to minimize when I write fiction again, after the next 2 or 3 books. But for me, when I write non-fiction, and my next 3 books are non-fiction as well, my crossover stories are not just of linking stories in terms of universes, but to try and tell stories that I believe are not told enough or not often enough, and try and bring it to audiences that either choose to ignore it, or don't get to read about it, or don't get to know about it. That's what essentially drives me. So, that is on account of my travels, that is on account of my experiences, perhaps. I have a few years on Chandrahas, which is why I imagine I can say it with a sense of surety, I imagine, which affects a work of fiction as well as a work of non-fiction, is what I'm trying to get. I mean, whatever story that you're trying to tell at the end of the day must be relevant to yourself first. You must distill the motive of the story, whether it's fiction or non-fiction, or poetry, or a screenplay, or anything for that matter, anything creative, a painting, anything that you do is is a distillate of what your feelings are and what your thoughts are, and any medium that you choose to apply it with is basically your story. And the crafts that we saw earlier today in the presentation, to my mind, are also applications of that very pursuit. So that's what essentially drives me. And telling India, writing India, is a wonderful thing, and I don't think that we'd ever be we'd ever fall short of a story. There are stories everywhere. Unimaginable stories, imaginary stories, imaginable stories, facts that are beyond imagination. I mean, if I may put it that way, you can't even, fact in India is stranger, way stranger than fiction. And I deal with non-fiction, so I speak from my heart on that. I don't think in India, writing India is a deficit of India. It's a deficit of the writer, that not enough of India is still being written. So we have, I think as writers, I would like to, I could easily spend the rest of my life writing 15 books, and I wouldn't have done even a minimalistic justice to what a writer I believe ought to be doing. Chandrahas is younger than me. He's got a lot more books than me to write, so he'll be writing India a lot after I'm done, I can tell you that, and I hope to do it. Yeah. On Chinese restaurants and all kinds of weird things. The Parsi and the Oriya is a bit of a stretch, even for a crossover book, but I haven't read it, so I reserve my comments on that.
So maybe we'll come back together and talk about how you consider Oriya Rasagullas better than
Absolutely, they
than Bengali Rasagullas. Okay. Now, going back to Chanda, there was the clouds. Now it's brilliant, no doubt about that. But in both Arzee the Dwarf and in clouds, specifically in clouds, both Billy Moria and Robi and Oi and Ija, they all dream and yearn for a place that is the place that they are not in. Now Mumbai is something that they stay, but one dreams for San Francisco, the other dreams for Bhubaneswar and Tini Nodi, that is how you pronounce it, Tini Nodi. So how is that? Is that a kind of a reflection? It's very stupid of me if I'm going to ask you how much of the artist is in it. Is Billy Moria, you, is Brandy Roy, you, but we will not ask that. But to what extent does that in a way kind of get back to the position that I asked you?
It's a good question. To very briefly sketch in the background of the story, which since Sudev has read it and some of you may not have. Clouds is a double-sided story in which both sides of this, they're both set in Bombay and they both have a kind of cloud theme, but the protagonists are not related to each other. And the one side is a much more cosmopolitan, anglicized world where the protagonist is a Parsi psychotherapist who we see him in his last week in Bombay, about to leave for the West because he has not been able to find love in Bombay after his divorce. He kind of thinks it's a society where you cannot find love in your 40s, the second time in your life, there's no one around for you to meet. Correct. And the other side of the story is this young tribal boy from South Orissa who's there as a carer to two very old and cantankerous Oriya Brahmins who are only there for medical treatment, and he's there as their caretaker. So he's tied to them and he cannot leave this one room. So while on one side of the story, this person who's lived in Bombay all his life is leaving for good, takes a goodbye parade of his city and is in a different place every moment in his old Maruti car, vintage Maruti, Zelda it's called. On the other side, we have this protagonist who's stuck in this one room in suburban Bombay and he cannot get out and only can hear the crosstalk of these two old people going back and forth across him. So although they both yearn to leave Bombay, one of them yearns to leave Bombay because he's tired of having spent his entire life in it and he feels there's nothing more to offer him. And the other side, the three people want to leave Bombay because they cannot even figure Bombay out. They want to go home. And so it's a journey of adventure of two kinds of journeys of the soul. They're not both kind of homecoming. And through that, I felt this would be an interesting contrast of narratives in the city because in a way, there are two Bombays. One is the Bombay of the insider's Bombay, which is that of the same way as there's an insider's Kolkata. The Bombay of people who have lived there all their lives, whose families have been there, for whom certain streets, certain buildings, certain roads resonate with thousands of meanings. And then there is the Bombay that is being met up every single day by somebody who arrives there for the first time and sees BD station or bus depot. And on the world of his imagination or dreams then finds some way to negotiate with the city and eventually perhaps becomes an insider or leaves. So I felt this would be, in a city I'd grown up in and knew a lot about, this would be, in one book, a good way to write about the city from 2 points of view, neither of which, nothing that one person thinks could have been thought by the other side. by anybody in the other side of the story. So that to me kind of was a composite picture that is interesting to write as a novelist rather than sticking in one or the other. And then he would also write two kinds of language, which is part of the, I think, the key problems of writing India. What kinds of language do you devise to represent different kinds of realities?
Coming to Sudeep, now this is about Bengali, which is a controversial book in the sense. Every Bengali will have some kind of a position, some kind of opinion about this. Now, first thing, why did you go into so much of trouble and to use Bangla terms? Your book one, this is the contents. Book one, Utsho, Genesis and more, and you are writing Utsho as it's like somebody who's unable to write it in Bangla, the script. So you're writing UTSHO, Utsho, then Janma Sutro, and How Mao. Shei Shomoy, Amader Robindranath, and you're spelling Robindranath as in the way we really Bengalis pronounce R-O-B-I-N-D-A. Or Bengali, which is interesting, saying non-Bengali is not the word, you're using the term not Bengali. Dapot, Domon, scenic beauty, very interesting. Instead of S-C-N-I-C-B-E-A-U-T-I-T-Y, he writes S-I-N-I-K-B-E-W-T-Y. So you're making fun of ourselves, yourself, in a way. Is this a uniquely Bengali trait?
Yeah, if you talk to a Bihari gentleman or lady, he or she will talk about, oh, hum dekhe hain, wo Cincinnati dekhe hain. When you talk about a Bengali, talk to a Bengali in Bangladesh, or in Paschim Bongo, or in Kachar, or Barak Valley, which is a bongo that we forget completely. The Bengali will talk about scenic beauty, like there's a sea beach and there's a scenic beauty. Now, it's not to make fun of it, this is just how we speak. And when I'm writing a book about Bengalis in English, not to tell Bengalis who they are, but also to do so, because there are many half Bengalis, there are quarter Bengalis, there are non-resident Bengalis, there are Bengalis of all kinds. There are also Bengalis in Bangladesh, which many Bengalis in Paschim Bongo discount the Bengalis altogether. So one must speak about the other. Epar Bangla, Opar Bangla, in many ways, through all the idiosyncrasies and the pseudo-Bengaliness of Epar and Opar, are actually in many ways Epar and Opar. Let's be real. The Shondhi exists and the Bikshe exists as well. The unity or the similarity exists alongside the differences. So if I have to tell all this and then also introduce it to an audience that either does not understand Bangla or does not read Bangla, and if I am to talk about the Bengalis where millions of us have paid a blood sacrifice in order to speak, read and write our language, emphatically so, then surely, and if this is a language that we're so proud of in its intonation, in its culture, in its roots, in its practice, in the way we speak, the way we live, love, work, everything, from poetry to pandemonium, then surely, if I'm writing about my people, then I have to, if I don't write about my people's language, or how it tastes, how it feels, this language is so precious to us, that makes us as much as all the other facets of being Bengali, then such a large part of us would be completely uncommunicable. So it was important for me to offer to the readers of the Bengalis the Bengali. If we say Rabindranath Tagore, then they must know that we call him Rabindranath Tagore, an approximate pronunciation as close to that as possible. If it is what? If it's Mishti Doi, then they must know how to say it. It's not Rasgulla of Kolkata, which the Indigo stewardesses unfortunately keep saying. It's bloody Kolkata. Even if the Hindi speakers say, or the Marathi speaker, there's a ka, o, la, ka, aki matra, ta, a. You can say it. But I have to, it's very easy to do it if you want to try. So it is incumbent upon me to, I'm not an evangelist for Bengali, but I have to bring it to, and also the humor. We are not, we take ourselves very seriously, as you know. But we also must communicate to the not Bengali, or Bengali is a term I absolutely despise and abhor. I'm actually ashamed of it. I get all very worked up when I hear Bengali. Because the Japanese have a word for foreigner, the Chinese have a word for foreigner. but they don't have a word as rude as Obangali. So, non-Bengali translating as Obangali, there is no Marathi, there is no Gujarati, there is no Bhaiya, to be very rude, for all my Shashtang Pranam to all the UP guys over here. But whatever, but you see what I'm trying to get at, it must be Dapur, Domon. I can say all the things in English, but I must also communicate it in Bangla. So that the headings of the chapter which Sudev was referring to, they are in English, also in Bangla, not mirror translations, but mood translations. I think that is the essence of translation, and that's what I've tried to follow. And as a Bengali, I've spoken a lot. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sudeep. This is for Chandrahas. I was going through media reports on clouds. A lot of critics have said that this could have been books. That you wasted it in the sense you should have kept it for a rainy day, because the cloud scheme, cloud maker and all these neologisms that I found. In fact, I made a list. Clouds, cloud tribe, cloud murmur, cloud machine, cloudy grace. Is this a kind of reappropriating Robi's tribal identity through this? That's one. Two is referring to the first novel called Arzee, the Dwarf. In both these two novels, which you set in Mumbai, but you just refer to Mumbai throughout in the conversation as Bombay. What is the reaction when you do this in Mumbai? If you keep on referring to there's a Bombay, is it a statement that you're making by referring it to Bombay because that is the time that was Bombay was called Bombay while you were growing up, or is that we'll come back to that? You have to answer that part of this question. Two is in both these the actual physical limits of the geography of the city are limited. For example, I was trying to trace Arzee's perambulations vis-a-vis the city. He doesn't travel much. So it's not the entire city that has been represented. You have to also answer, can a city be represented truly, entirely? Similarly, with the case of Billy Moria and Roby, and we saw small rooms, small places within his ambit of travel where Zara and Zelda fight for special position in his life. So, do you think that is the real true way of actually telling you the city, rather than giving the extensive city which is difficult to give because then it becomes an unreal city? So, all cities are truncated.
I mean, novelistically, the only city that's truthful is a city that exists in the imagination of the character that you're writing about. You as a writer are completely bound by what you've set up for the character. And in this case, when you have two cities in a book, because of two characters, then you set up the question which you've just asked. Aren't there different cities for each one of us? Whereas if it was two books, separate ones, then in each time you would have still been in one city. And that 1 + 1 is not exactly 2 in the case of my writing a double-sided book. And in a way, there's two, the geographies are very different actually today because, the Ravi side of the book ends in Virar on top of this mountain, which no self-respecting South Bombay ever goes to. Neither to Virar nor to the Jeevdani mountain. And in the case of Arzee the Dwarf, actually, since the theme of the book is that he lives on this one street, and very close to that street is this very old cinema. That cinema is part of his, it's almost a part of his body because here's a man who's only 3.5 feet tall. And when he works as a projectionist in a cinema and looks down at the public of Bombay from above, the cinema is almost like a second body. So once you've done that in the realm of geography, made a building, a body into a building and a building back into a body, do we really need to say what's happening that day in Malad or doing that? There has to be, novelistic work is about, and as is all artistic work, about distillation and focus, where a part stands for the whole. Because we're not working in the realm of, it's not a newspaper. It doesn't have to involve local reporting from all sides of the city. And then, when a reader brings his own imagination to that, you kind of reconstruct the city in a book. And little gestures and layers that you develop on the side. For instance, when Arzee the Dwarf is suddenly out of a job, the Noor is about to shut down, somebody gives him this work of being a bottle, playing a small bottle of soda, wearing a bottle suit in different malls in Bombay, and that's when he travels into the suburbs the first time and he absolutely hates it. Although he's very poor, he has South Bombay's contempt for the rubbishy suburbs. So that is an ironical situation which has meaning in the book. So in these ways, I feel that although one should aim for amplitude and expanse, it still has to be grounded in the real experience of people whom the reader can reimagine for themselves. I think this is not inauthentic or unrealistic. As for the question of Bombay, it's a much more banal answer, and I think it should be banal, which is that just as there's Calcutta and Kolkata, there's always Bombay, and Mumbai. And people are free to use whatever they like, and in different contexts, the different words are true. There's different Bombays for each of these. There's different reference for each of these. And to change the name officially doesn't mean that you have to change anything else. Citizens and writers are not expected to follow suit. I mean, the address may change at the level of what is on the map, but you keep your own word, and for everyone who grew up there, there's no reason to change it. I mean, if your best friend changes name tomorrow, wouldn't you still call him by whatever you knew him as? It's the same.
Okay, I'll come to Sudeep here. Now, Goa. Okay, you call it, the book, you call it the Malays de Goa, which is basically taking over of Goa by a particular nexus of land sharks and drug dealers and foreigners. Okay, now, do you think that this novel actually ties up with your other investigative journalistic piece of writing? For example, Red Sun, Highway 39, and the book that I did not read, hold. Yes.
Let's make this simple.
Yeah. It's difficult because I found that.
No, my editors, there after publication of the book, also felt that it was a bit weird. So the title, I forgive you.
Okay, forgive me. Right. So, how do you respond to this? To what extent is this really a novel in the way Chandrahas writes novels, not so much interested in the issues, but more about human characters and feelings and emotions? This is more like an issue.
No, but his characters, when you have an emotion, when you have a reaction to something, it is based on something. It's based on the life you lead, which is sort of based on issues of livelihood or lack of it, or issues of so many things. So I think it would be addressing issues in a different way. So Chandrahas would address it perhaps in a more lyrical way, from what I gather. I would address it in a more sort of, I'm a bit of a critique, grotty kind of writer. I like the netherworld. I like the nether bits of society and the nether bits of writing. So it's, for me, linguistics is about application of how well you can string together words of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 syllables. If you want to really be Shashi Tharoor, then you don't descend below 4 syllables a word. But the thing is that, sorry, I like Shashi Tharoor for the record. He sells millions of copies of his books, which subsidizes my work with the same publishing house that I publish with. I wish him very well. All the syllable, multi-syllable words that he can use, he's welcome to use. I'm happy for it. That digression aside, so you see, that's for me an issue. So, but facetiousness apart, it is, I think a writer is, at least I am as a writer, quite political, whether I address, I've had a career as a journalist, then I've had a career as a sort of independent journalist, and then a writer of fiction and non-fiction. And I've deliberately chosen, I think just too much in me, I've just seen too much that I am too full up with of outrage, or not moral outrage, just pissed off is I think the sort of the simplistic way of putting it, and I need to get these stories out there. So it's sort of, my books are a bit dark. You will find lots of objectionable words, and I say that within quotes, without using quotes. Shashi would never do that. Yeah, he would, exactly. See? And so they give galis. They are foul-mouthed, foul-hearted, evil, dark souls who delight in dismembering society, in dismembering life itself. And there's the good guy and the bad guy, and the angels and the super angels, and the bad angels, and the great angels. So I like to live that world, and my non-fiction world inhabits that zone in any case, because I write about issues of conflict and conflict resolution, which is very, very messy. So I think that I'm just driven by that kind of storytelling. And some stories are better told as fiction, some stories I'm able to better communicate as a non-fiction writer, or as an essayist, or as a columnist. So that's basically how it is. Goa, in particular, I mean, it's something that Goa is a place. It's now my home, second home. I'm Bengali in Goa for the last 15 years. I've been visiting the place for 30 years now, and I lived there for 15. It's a place that I'm actually driven up the wall by the presumption of a place calling itself paradise. When I hear this self-description of Goa is paradise, come to paradise, it's very suspicious. You lift up rocks in paradise and you'll find creepy crawlies immediately. You know, so as I visited Goa, I lived Goa, if you will, I saw the creepy crawlies. I saw what was Goa too, but a parallel universe which nobody wanted to touch, because when you, ladies and gentlemen, go and fly out, that is not the Goa you want to engage with, and that's fine, because you're going there for another Goa, the party Goa. But when you take your poison and you party and you leave your poison behind, you leave something behind. The detritus is what drives the economy of Goa. That detritus is what drives many aspirations of Goa. And these are not all noble aspirations, even with the free spirit of capitalism. It makes Goa a very messy, dirty place. Even though I live in a beautiful, pristine village, the underbelly of my village is a very messy place. So I wanted to bring that out in my novel. So it's, again, gritty, grotty, dark, hopefully funny. It's upset a lot of people, which pleases me to no end. And a few people at addresses are not known to read, so I actually give the book to people who would read in the hope that they would read it to these people. I will not take names here, or maybe I will if you ask me politely.
Okay, a couple of more questions, then I'll ask you to read from your books, then we'll take in questions from the house. Now, both of you have referred to these terms while we are having this conversation: creepy crawlies, netherworld, underbelly. You know, in Arzee, the Dwarf, there is always a kind of an underbelly at work. You know, to the darker side of Mumbai, and represented by Noor. You know, it's dark, it's large, it's empty, it's underlit. And also, in a way, to what extent will you react to the fact that you've been compared with Charles Dickens in this specific reference to A Tale of Two Cities? Okay. Now I'll come back to that, because you have also been referred to with specific reference to the baptism of Toli Kalangote with Thomas Hardy and Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Okay. Now, please respond to these.
If what somebody says about your book on reading it, that it reminds them of this or that writer, doesn't necessarily have anything to do about your own writing of it. But I did feel, I was very fortunate in that I think one of the problems of being a writer in India, and especially here, you know, like for a lot of us, perhaps the language is good, but we are brought up I certainly was brought up in a very protected middle class environment, and our parents do everything they can to make sure that you're never going to be the writer that you then end up wanting to be. Because you then have to go out into the world and learn lots of things that are not part of your everyday life, which also I continue with the days of my China Dragon. But I think I did myself the biggest favor by giving up my first job, which was as a journalist for Cricket Magazine. And I just couldn't stand the idea of going to work and the long, slow days of intellectual sloth and squalor, which is what it ends up being, perhaps sometimes as a result of your own fault as well. And suddenly I was out of a job, and I lived with my mother and sister at the time, and in the morning the two ladies would get up and go to work, and they kind of thought I was just taking one long vacation, because they couldn't see what exactly I was up to. And lacking work, I would go out into Bombay, but I had the whole day to myself, and I ended up sometimes going to these cinemas which show old films in Bombay. And in there I found a parallel world of lots of people who, for much worse reasons than me, also have no jobs, and who go there to forget their lives. For morning shows at 12 o'clock sometimes there will be 100 people there. And it's like a vast consoling darkness, which the priest of this kind of temple was a projectionist. And there people went, slept, thought, dreamt, and forgot their worries, and came out 3 or 4 hours later talking about something else, thinking about something else. And it seemed like an incredible space. And there's also an atmosphere about Bombay. You know, it's very hard to get pure darkness in Bombay anywhere, in the deadest of night, in any corner of the city. and that existed this parallel universe where all was night, and night was precisely what people sought. And inside that night there was this one single beam of light that arrowed through it all and met an even bigger and brighter reality. Was to me a very, that kind of art making, which is not just what the filmmaker has made, but what the social space has made and what the architecture has made, seemed to me a very good base for a story. And from there, like other thoughts came to me for Dwarf and that and so on. So in the end, you concoct a certain kind of tone as a result of your material, your protagonist, and your own prose style, which ideally as a novelist should change from book to book based on what kind of material you're tackling in. So, which again brings us back to the theme of writing India, the need to find different styles and different focuses to represent different realities. But that was a smaller project, literally, too. It was one person walking through the city, and it was written in a much more English style, perhaps as a result of my education. Then my second book, which was 8 years later, and because it was the social space in Clouds was much bigger, I had to sort of undo what the kind of prose I knew how to write something that would be persuasive for Clouds.
Your take on creepy crawlies, netherworld?
Before I go further, I just realized that we were talking, both Chandrahas and I, and you, by the way, making these grand sweeping statements about writing India and whatever kind of thing. I just thought I would clarify, and we should get this out of the way with all respect to all of us, is that I think India's been writing India for a heck of a long time, only not in English. So I think we should pay homage to much writing that happens in every Indian language, or communicated in every Indian language, whether oral or written, in any form. So I think we should accept that, acknowledge that, cherish that, and also be part of that universe where we are contributing to writing India in another language that India has co-opted for itself, as George Babu told us, with the help of people like not Raja Ram Mohan Roy, correct, and so on and so on. So I just wanted to get that out of you, because I get this funny feeling whenever writing India comes up, as if only people who write in English write India. Yeah, but writing India today, I mean, for heaven's sake, look at whatever, a lot of the translations that we're reading now in English are from Kannada, from Malayalam, from Bangla. My friend Oruna Hosina Buntu, don't tell him I told you, it's not dark now. Alright, but I'm just playing fair. He's made a bloody industry out of translating Bangla into English, and thank heavens. I mean, he takes our treasures to the world in a different way than Robert Clive did. I mean, I'm all for good, So, in that sense, where would we have digressed so completely? Creepy crawlers. Okay, so, no, I mean, I think I said it. When I look at the underbelly, I'm looking at the underbelly that drives a person in Central or Eastern India, and has done so for a while. Not about ideology, but why would a person, for instance, if you talk to a Maoist rebel, very few people know about Mao and why they call Maoabadi, for instance, but why would a person pick up a weapon with a 99% chance of not living out the year by taking on an extremely powerful state? I mean, you must be out of your mind to do that. Why? Why would people get so angry that, would you be angry if the 12-year-old child, Dalit girl, was beheaded, as you read today, a great person then beheaded? So is her brother, it's legit for her brother or her uncle to get very angry and, go against the state, or go and, chop up an upper caste person, whatever? What drives us, So for me, the creepy crawlies are the sort of the things that we in city bubbles, very conveniently in our, what I call mall stupor, increasingly so, we are stupefied increasingly so by malls and whatever we take as the lives that we ought to lead, and discount this entire country, 90% of your country, 80% of your society. If I read on northeastern India, that's 1/7 of Republic of India's bloody landmass, and you discount it completely, like it's out there, out of sight, out of mind, doesn't count. 50 million people. Why has the government woken up now? Because coalition politics has decided there are 25 Lok Sabha seats. There's no other reason to wake. So for me, these are the creepy crawlies. Creepy crawlies don't need to always be the muck as you see the muck, but the muck as it exists in real term in policy making or lack of policy making or in our mindsets. I know these are sort of idealistic terms, but what the hell, we're writers. And if you're not idealistic about the world that we want to live in, or the world we want to construct, or the world we want to retrospect, then what the hell are we doing? So when I'm talking about creepy crawlies, it's very many things. It's mood. It's the darkness, it's the light, it's the lack of it. So it's all of the above. So that's for me creepy crawlies. From New Delhi to the remotest part of Goa, where I live, creepy crawlies all across the way. And you need to reduce it. I'm not saying fumigate it. That would be what they do for a living. I'm just saying that we must address it, we must discuss it, bring it to light. When I'm saying creepy crawlies, it's not insects, but a mind full of dirt, a mind full of baggage. That's what I'm talking about. That's for me the creepy that I also want to address.
So shall we go for some reading from yet to be published sneak peek?
This is my book which is going to come out next month, Days of My China Dragon. A brief preamble to explain what it's about. I used to live, at the age of 30, I was finally able to afford renting my own place in Bombay. And I moved out one day and found this little one-room apartment in central Bombay, Dadar. And I went down to eat. I was very hungry. I sort of moved out on a day when my mother was away, so she wouldn't resist. And I went down and found this little hole-in-the-wall restaurant, and they said, we've never seen you around. And I said, well, I've just moved in, and they said, well, actually, we also just started up this week. So here we were, like 2 new projects with our own dreams in Bombay. And actually, it turned out to be the greatest university I ever went to, because till then, I'd never seriously engaged on a daily basis with the life of labor. And to sit there as a somewhat privileged person and to see all these people come around you and become your friends, and sometimes you would eat dinner, when actually 2 kinds of people eat most of their meals in restaurants. Some kinds of customers and then waiters and cooks. That's where they also eat in the restaurant when the shutters are down. So I got a chance to eat on both sides of that class divide. And it became an amazing world which combined food, friendship and fellowship. And we created all sorts of stories. Whenever there was something to celebrate, we all got together. And sadly, it's no more. It's shut down. Not as you know, the restaurant business has a very high turnover. And even the best meaning people, when they started, they may be very good as human beings, but if the business doesn't work out in a cruel city like Bombay, it's gone. And I thought, as after having written 2 bigger books about Bombay, I wanted to write a book of stories about what this world meant. But to do so, I would again have to unlearn something from my perspective, because it would be written from the point of view of the proprietor, who was much more politically incorrect than I was and continues to be. So what I would see as labor toiling away, he would see as people, who are just like, they're going to be here for 3 months and then it's going to give me a huge trouble for some reason and I'll then never show up again. The book is divided between long and short stories. And actually enjoyed writing the very short ones a lot, because sometimes when you know a character, even a page or 2 lines can be interesting when you think about something. But I think I'm going to read a page and a half from a story, a waiter who loves to read and who's trying to make his own journey as a man in the city. It's called Shivbhakt Pintu Masurkar. For many months after he first came to work at the China Dragon, the general consensus among the staff was that every day was potentially the waiter Pintu Masurkar's last day at work. The joke amongst them, which often reached Pintu's ears and made him smile with a mixture of embarrassment and self-pity, was that Pintu had in his wallet a permanent unreserved ticket back to his hometown Kolhapur on the Yeshwantpur Express, which leaves Dadar TT at 4 o'clock every afternoon. The day he was fired, at least he would be home to his mother before midnight, unless, of course, he got off at the wrong station. Not that there was a problem with Pintu's attitude, as there has been and always will be among staff members at my restaurant and in the restaurant industry in general, for there is nothing like the restaurant business to test a man's character and nothing like man's character to test the restaurant business. No, our Pintu was not a sly cooker of plots and schemes, nor was he a slacker like some of the other waiters. He didn't want all the good gigs like getting to ride the bicycle for home deliveries, and nor was he always angling for a raise. He took no pleasure in watching someone else get ticked off, as he could well have done, given how often he was in trouble himself. He had no bad habits like chewing gutka or drinking tharra, and I know that he sent half his salary home to his family. Even when he was no longer the junior most of the waiters, He was still the last to serve himself from the pot of staff food. And not only did Pinto not take any extra days off, even on his weekly day off, he could sometimes be seen hanging around the restaurant, pathetically lonely and ill at ease, without the very folk who pulled his legs so relentlessly, for this lost soul had no other friends. No. Pinto's problem was just that he was so eager, so sweet, so nervous, and so out of place in Bombay. Forget doing work. He had so many complexes, insecurities, reservations, and doubts that just being a body in space and time was a matter of continuous difficulty for him. For his work, he had to wear a white shirt, black pants, and a black waistcoat. And just this beginning unnerved him. He who had worn cast-offs from his older brother all his life and thought that only rich people wore a second layer of clothing. Now Pinto was a well-dressed waiter in a good class of restaurant, but he did not have the personality or confidence to play this beginner's role in the theatre of restaurant life. Or maybe as a director was not good enough, who knows. Then, coming from a small town in a dal bhat sabzi kind of background, he had no understanding what Chinese food was all about. So he could not explain the ingredients and styles of different dishes to the customers with any conviction, other than murmuring gravy dish or dry mix, very good when pressed, which can hardly be the way to work up anyone's appetite or get them to order the dishes that make profits for the house. My argument to Pinto that nobody in India actually knows what real Chinese food is all about, especially customers. It's all a big con game and you are just another player. This had no effect on Pinto. He first had to jump through the hoops of Bombay and restaurant life before he could get to Chinese, which is a lot to ask for any traveler on this, a long, twisting, noodle-like road of life.
Brilliant. Sudeep. Noodle-like road.
This book is still in progress, and the submission is a couple of months away, and it should be published by November, if they like it. I hope you do. I hope you do, the little bit that I'm going to read. It's a bit of a shift away from me from the usual writing that I do, because it's a book is on the Battle of Polashi, the Battle of Plassey, Polashi Jutto, in many ways, and I'm saying it in all three different ways, because it's like a Rashomon thing, you know, it's like there's so many versions of Plassey slash Polashi, Polashi slash Palassi. We forget the Persian speakers or the Turkis or the Afghans who were in Murshidabad. I mean, there are many, many versions as to how you see it. And that actually what drew me, because you have the sort of the Brit telling, which you had for the longest time. Clive was one of the first people to actually make notes and Iron Coot and so on and so forth. Robert Orme's histories, which are sort of evocative military history, brilliantly done, and subsequent histories. They imagined the fiction by someone like Lord Macaulay, writing about Lord Clive. There we go. And Nirad Babu's work, which is a sort of a hagiography of Clive, a justification for empire, all kinds of things. God bless him. Then you have people like Okoy Kumar Mitra, who's written the story, again a fine history, but in a way to almost reclaim Shiraj for the Bengali pride. And if you read the tellings of the whole Polashi deal over in Bangladesh in the present day, and there are many books that have come out which I referred to in Bangla and in English, they're about how Hotobaga Shiraj, that's all you hear, the hopeless, lost soul who was sort of doomed from his birth almost, and the death of his grandfather Ali Wali Khan. And he was sort of doomed to be this way, and oh my God, etc., etc. So there are various strands of the story which I like, and oftentimes one kind of telling uses the other kind of telling as a justification for yet another kind of strand of storytelling. So my purpose is to not use that politically, because I don't have an agenda except to inform, but to use all strands. So I'm trying to actually, it's a bit, to me, it reminds me of Rashomon. There are many versions, at many layers. Some are creative, some are figments of people's imagination, some are fact-led, or you're led to believe they're fact-led because that's the only damn facts you've got, which is noted. It could be opinion, but it's a memo by the East India companies, which is taken as fact, for instance. So I just like it, and I also like the fact that for me, history, I'm a student of history, that I find it very political, and it also appeals to my creepy crawly need, you know, the gritty gritty need. And I also love the way that there is living history, which I thrive on. Case in point is what you see in Motijil, if any of you go to Murshidabad and go for the Sonnet Lumiere show for 20 rupees, 20 minutes, 1 rupee a minute of our finest history, where you have Watts asking Jagat Sid, to Jagat Sid, apni ki kariben? You know, there's that whole thing of how the creative scriptwriting comes through, and then Clive, in this grandest Jatra tradition, will say, "That bloody Siraj, waha ke chhari bona." The whole thing, this whole construct of history that happens, I find it fascinating. I love it, because imagine it's 250 years ago, and one of the greatest empires in the world, and we are the creators of it in our own way, or the losers of it, you know. And even Shashi, my old friend, has written a whole damn book on it, The Era of Darkness. Just see where it all began, plastic. So this is basically a book of history, but a book also of various histories. It's a book of various histories to cumulatively come to Polashi 1757, 20th June. And here I try and, because I think in my mind I'm a failed novelist. Don't tell anybody. I'll kill you. No, I'm kidding. I'm not. I'm quite a successful novelist. But I try and apply literary technique to my non-fiction writing. And I hope with what I'm about to read to you, I will be able to convey something. This is a scene which is oftentimes played out by many people. Just a day and a half before the battle itself, there's this reflective moment that Robert Clive has in the grove where he goes to meditate, because for him it's sort of lose everything, it's win or lose, it's a complete gamble, nobody knows what's going to happen, nothing is a done deal, except for a few people who wrote about the battle 100 years after it happened, and wrote a paean to Clive. And some of you may know this gentleman as Nobin Chandra Sen, who wrote a book called, epic poem called Polashi Juddha, which is a fine, fine work of fiction, taking as history. So I try to weave fiction and fact and fiction and opinion and mood and so on and so forth with critical history. So let's see how this goes. You're my test audience. I have not, no, it's good. I have not read this aloud before. I printed it out in the reception room right here. 3 A4 pages, double space, won't take me too long. Here we go. How could events ever turn against Clive at Plassey? His victory was foreshadowed by Britannia itself. The fort at Katwa emphatically won, Plassey looming, the company's officers and troops dreamed their dreams of glory at camp. Some looked forward to promotion, some painted temples of gold in their minds, others had, through powers of imagination, already slain Siraj, arrived at the treasury, waving banners of victory, and looted it. A little away from camp, Clive was seated under a tree in deep contemplation, his wide forehead a battlefield of bravery, a repository of wisdom, his breast a doorway to Yama's realm of death, awash in compelling streams of doubt and courage, his eyes bright as diamonds, his stare still penetrating, resolute. High, despaired the warrior. I disregarded the counsel of war, the counsel of everyone, and waded into the sea of battle without once thinking of the future. If I sink, we will all sink, even Britain. That's when an apparition, a vision arrived, an exquisite lady bathed in the light of 1,000,000 Kohinoors, dressed in the Englandio fashion, and spoke. Ki bhoy bachoni? Englandia Rajlokhi ami, Shubhagini, Shuno Biromani, Parakromi, Putre Gorovini ami, Chirogorovini. What is there to fear, my child? Hear me, or jewel among the brave. Hear me as I am England's Lakshmi, her very fortune. I'm ever so proud of my brave son. Tomar chintaয় আজি টুরিল আসন, আসিনু পৃথিবী তলে, তোমারে বাছনি শুনাইতে ভবিষ্যৎ বিধির লিখন শুনিলে উল্লাসে তুমি নাচিবে Your initiative has unsettled the throne and I have come down to earth to tell you, my child, of what fate has written for you. And you will dance with joy when you hear it. জবনের অত্যাচার সহিতে না পারি হতভাগ্য বঙ্গবাসী চিরপরাধীন রয়েছে আশ্রয় তব etc. You get it? Am I getting it? Okay, good. The unfortunate people of Bengal, long subjugated and unable any longer to withstand the cruelties of the Jabon, have sought shelter with you. I mean, that is fantasy in the second canto by Nobin Chandra Sen, who published this epic poem, Palashi Judo, in 1875, combining a paean to Clive and Crown with criticism by a Bengali Hindu of the real and perceived depredations in the region of several centuries of Jabon rule, which is taken from the Sanskrit Nabanna, literary barbarian or foreigner, which was in classical Bengali, as you know, often used for Muslim rulers. The assurance replied by the gorgeous and inspirational Britannia consumed fully 18 stanzas of this canto. And as you have read, and here I'm assuming you will read my book, so at this point, as you will have read, Bengali historians like Akhoy Kumar Moitra severely criticized the poem about 20 years later when he raised the question, as the scholar Rosinka Choudhury reminds us in an essay in the Journal of Asian Studies, and here I quote, of the relationship of history to poetry and to truth. Moitra even wrote to the poet to query him about historical roots of the poem, even for the imaginary deprivators of Siraj that you've already read about. In reply, Choudhury notes, an interlocutor, which was the editor of Shahitya, Sudev Chandra Samajpati, said on behalf of the poet, not a single line, acclaimed no line, Palashi Judo is poetry, not history. And that is what he has permitted me to write to you. But Moitra stood his ground, in particular because many people wouldn't have the courage to conclude that the poem written by a patriotic, erudite man of letters was anything but history. There were other factors that Moitra thought needed debunking, as Choudhury relates, citing Nobin Chandra's autobiographical work of 1908. Within months of the poem's release, it was put up as a play by a group called the New Aryan Theatre, where the famous actor-director Girish Chandra Ghosh is said to have first made a name for himself when he played the part of Clive. And Choudhury adds, the matter was complicated by the fact that the poem had been published in a textbook version by Shamnal and Company of Kolkata, with a preface attached to it that vouched for it as the history of Bengal and attested to its suitability as a textbook for use in schools, which is remarkable, really, when you think about it. So in a footnote, Moitra quotes from the preface to this history book edition, and I quote Mr. Moitra here, not only has a complete poem like this a merit of its own superior to that of mere compilation of fugitive pieces, but as it is also the history of Bengal of the period in verse, the introduction of such a book into our schools will be doubly beneficial to the students and an encouragement to real talent and for the literature of Bengal. So here fiction was made fact. And reality, of course, as you know, ladies and gentlemen, was somewhat more infirm. And even with the undeniable rush of British adrenaline, even with the classic conspiracy signed and sealed, because it wasn't yet delivered. Clive certainly had plenty of reasons for worry and doubt. Enough for Lady Britannia to soothe the jittery Clive in anyone's imagination. Mir Jafar, after all, Mir Jafar, the linchpin of the coup, remained for him a major concern. So if I read more, so I'm trying to read history and trying to make it come as alive as possible. So that, and as you're a lot of academicians here, you'll realize that a lot of your fine work are actually in footnotes. And you can't imagine how much enjoyment and delight I derive from reading all the fine works of history. And such fabulous material are there resting in footnotes, which not many people read, unfortunately. So I've tried to bring that up, and I hope that it serves its purpose. And I hope some of you get to read the book. I'm pitching really hard because my young friend's book is out next month. I have to wait 8 months more, by which time you might forget. So I hope some of you get to read the book. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we are running a bit behind time, so can we have some quick answers from the audience? Quick questions from the audience. That's a Freudian slip, yes.
I read your book on the Bengalis and I found it absolutely delightful.
Where have you been all my life?
See, I'm a true blue Bengali, although I've lived abroad for 50 years. So no, it's okay. You can hear.
I think I'm loud enough. I also have a question on the Bengalis. I first heard about your book, not here in Kolkata, but from my friends in Dhaka. The Dhaka Literary Fest had just taken place and probably you had there. But they appropriated the text as more to be Bengali within quotes in all ways that we did in West Bengal. And I was going to Dhaka for something else, and the request my professor friends there is said, no more books of Sudeep's book available here. Can you bring 4 or 5 copies for me from Kolkata? No, I'm not trying to, I'm telling you that.
I'm happy.
Yes. And then what happened, when I went on the day of the flight, when I went to pick up, Star Mark had only 1 copy left. Well, and later, when I read the book in the flight and came back and did the review, let me tell you, and hats off to a non-fiction that reads like it's a whodunit, a stick book. And when I did the review for the Statesman, I had to ask the editor. I had to ask the editor, can you give me 400 more word space? Because I really can't do justice to this book, in such a limited space. It's not that. I'm not flattering you, but I'm asking you 2-3 questions. I'm asking you 2-3 questions. Your idea of writing about the Bengalis in a more objective way, because you're an NRB living outside Bengal. That is what I said, NRB, a non-resident Bengal.
Where have you folks forgotten the word Probashi? What's going on here?
This is one. And the second is, who was your target readership in your mind when you wrote this book? Is it a pan-Indian, people who also know nothing of the culture-conscious and snoopy Bengalis, the kind of image that my pan-Indian friends have, that we are always either too sweetly singing Rabindra Sangit or we are talking politics.
Or saying Udi Baba and Hindi movies, so nothing at all.
So who was your target when you started writing? How did you begin? And as your stance, is it more objective? Yes, okay, because, and why the Bengalis on the other side claim to be more the book theirs than we Bengalis here on the way?
Well, I don't know. Well, thank you very much, and thank you for the review. And now I put name to face. So thank you again. And you had a few criticisms as well, which I take as learning. So thank you very much for that. See, I'm a good boy. Huh? So you and Shupriya's review really flattened my hand, because both of you, when you shoot arrows, there's landless garlands, so you can't reject them, you can't get upset with them, and you try and go with it. So thank you for that. So Sudeep Chakravarti, ladies and gentlemen, for those who don't get the picture. I think it's sort of 2 reasons. One is I think the time is right, where I was actually reading a book called The Italians many, many years ago, by this fine Italian journalist who wrote The Italians in the 1950s, right after the war, the gentleman called Luigi Arzee, and I recommend that you read the book. It's a fine book. It's a very critical look at the Italians who live on not just Pompeii, but Pomp, all the time from Rome on to now, fashionably on history and everything, and so on and so forth. It deconstructs the Italians, and that's what I wanted to do. So my book, I always saw it not just as a construction of the Bengali, but also a deconstruction of the Bengali, as to where we come from. So we behave like we are immaculately conceived. We are not. We're a Mongol people. We came from somewhere. A language came from nothing at all. A language came from Pali, which is a very fine language, and script, and we grew into something. And we have to acknowledge that. And about being accepted on the other side is possibly because I acknowledge the other side as being Bengalis too, which many people in West Bengal do not. I was going to Dhaka from Kolkata and I was asked by a Bhadralok, which is very problematic for me because I have to then talk about the Chodralok, which is a problematic binary for me, as you know I have in the book. He questioned my reason to go to Dhaka, and Anjum has heard this and Shondik has heard me say this before. He said, why do you want to go to Dhaka? I said, Bangladesh, the break up the word, a country of Bengalis, a country for Bengalis, a country of Bengal, whatever. And he hadn't realized that. Can you imagine? So maybe that's why, and maybe because I've also looked at those dynamics, including the one thing that people who are not affected by that. I'm from a broken family in the sense that I have roots in the East and West and whatever. But how suddenly one day Bongo woke up, or the need for Poshin Bongo happened. Suddenly, for 600 years, you didn't realize that this religion moving across the Bengal, and suddenly one day you woke up when it was time to count numbers, and you found, wow, the majority is over there. So on and so forth. So I think I acknowledge that history and that politics and that need, and also how they fought for a language and so on and so forth. So maybe I've been fair in their minds, that I haven't ignored the thing. And how can I ignore the fact that 2/3 of the world's Bengalis live in Bangladesh? How?
Also in the West.
In the West.
In the West.
Yeah. How can you possibly ignore that? Do we have something called Bangla Academy? Here. No, I'm being provocative here. Thank you. But about Probashi and distance and all of that kind of thing, I'm not sure if it's a distance of geography. I think there are many people who would write a biography of the people. Mine is the first biography of the people that my publisher has commissioned. There is a biography of the Gujarati people called the Gujaratis. There's one on the Punjabis. There's going to be one on the Tamils, but not immediately. It will come in its own organic moment. I think it's a time when we are mature enough to, like we're confronting ourselves as Indians and questioning our roots and where we're going, and also celebrating our roots and where we're going. I think it's time that we're mature as a society and as a people to, again, look at ourselves with a mirror in front of us. So, yes, it's my story of the Bengalis. Now, if you wrote the book, you would be writing your version of the Bengalis. So would any of us in this room. But I got that first, too bad. So you read my book, and if you like it, let me know. If you don't like it, also, do please let me know.
And as I said, what was your response from non-Bengalis?
They liked it. They said, oh, now I understand why that guy is such a maniac. Or, why I can't understand my wife half the time. Or why my children are messed up. No, I'm just kidding. You know what I'm saying. But, why Bengal is the way it is, or why Bangladesh is the way it is. Jokes apart, but it really helped that. And then, Bengalis are all over the world, so their children, they're quarter Bengalis, half Bengalis, so on and so forth. There are Bengali, not Bengali people who are Bengalis as partners and spouses for them, the other way around. And those who live overseas have lost links with home. And again, I think there are people, interesting enough people, see, there's the ego, who I think we are quite a few of us. We are 250,000 people, 1 billion people. We count for something in the world. We are the third largest group after the Han Chinese, in a way, in terms of the spoken language. Why shouldn't the world know a little more about us? The mysterious Bengali.
Did you get any response from our chief minister for including her in our
Does she read?
I don't know.
I'm asking, I'm being very, I don't know. Does she read? So last time I checked, she loses letters because I came on this brilliant flyover, which used to be called Poroma. হ্যাঁ থানুসের মতন পর ওটা কোথায় যে উড়ে গেল এখন আমি হ্যাঁ মা মানে পুরো সারা দুনিয়ায় এরকম নেই ফ্লাইওভার মা overpass called Ma, an interstate exchange in America called sort of Mummy. So I'm just asking, does she? I don't know. It's a book in black and white, not white and blue, so I'm not sure. Okay.
Any more questions? Maybe one last question before we move on to the next session. One last question for maybe Chandrahas. His book is coming out next month.
We are fine. We've had a good discussion, I think. Does somebody actually want to ask something? You do?
Because we haven't read your book, we can't attach it.
I don't have a question, but I just like to say it's a great book and everyone should read it. It's really well written and fun.
Alina, you wanted to ask a question?
Yes, it's to both of you. Because you started on the question whether Indian can be written. So what's your response to the way people from the West write Indian, thinking Mark Tully or William Dalrymple? Are you writing back in a sense?
I don't think I'm writing back at Mr. Tully, who I respect quite greatly. In fact, one of the reasons why I think I became a journalist is on account of people like Mr. Tully. So I'm quite alright with the way Mr. Tully does his work. Mr. Dalrymple also does very, very fine work. But I think I would like to write not back at Mr. Dalrymple, but write alongside Mr. Dalrymple, because I cracked a joke in a newspaper interview and he was very offended, but I told him it was a joke. Because someone asked me a question saying, why are you writing a book of history? So I said, why should only Willie Dalrymple make money off our history? It's time even we brown people make money off our history. The damn newspaper, Indian Express, put it as a headline. I would too, were I the editor. I got a mail from Willie 2 days later saying, dear Sudeep, I don't expect you to diss your friends like this. I said, Willie, it's a joke, for heaven's sake. So yes, I want to write alongside Mr. Dalrymple. He's done some brilliant work, as you all know. But I think it's a voice that I hope to bring by sourcing various sources, which Mr. Dalrymple is not always able to do, even with engaging interpreters or assistants, which unfortunately, because of my trilingual experience, I can. And I can't read Farsi, but I have friends who have done it for me. And books like the Siyar Mutakirin has been translated very helpfully by Ajay Mustafa, who's done my work for me many, many years ago. I'd like to write alongside Willie Dalrymple, but I would definitely write against even someone like liberal historian like John Kay, and definitely Mr. Bailey's of the world, and definitely the Macaulays of the world. Absolutely 100%, no doubt about it.
Right, thank you. Wish we had more time, we could continue this conversation. Thank you, both of you.
Yes, I think this was a good answer. I don't have anything to add to that. This was a very comprehensive answer. And I should just like to say, we should, before we leave, also thank Sudev, because for any event like this, the moderator does most of the work, and we just get to stand up, sit here, and speak about things that we've already done in the past. So it's not as much effort for us as this for him. And I think he asked some very good questions, which is why we had a very fulfilling session. So thank you very much for all of you here.